Welcome to Georgian Terraces, a podcast that starts with a nation and ends with a tea kettle. Today, we're going to take a journey through scale. We'll start at the widest possible angle, an area of rapid change in British history, and then we're going to zoom in step by step until we're holding a small object in our hands. Along the way, we'll pass through a city, stand in front of one of the most famous buildings in Britain, and end up in a drawing room, pouring tea from a silver kettle that tells us everything about the world that made it. Let's begin with Georgian England. Off we go. Chronologically, it all starts when George Ludwig, Arch-Treasurer of the Holy Roman Empire, becomes King George I of Great Britain. Britain was becoming a global power, trading across the world, and money started to flow into cities like London. The Georgian era runs from 1714 to 1830, the reigns of four successive King Georges. It's a period of extraordinary change. Britain is industrializing, urbanizing, and colonizing. The population is growing. Wealth is being created on an unprecedented scale. The Georgian elite pay a lot of attention to order. This is the age of enlightenment. Reason and logic become more important. This new philosophy shapes everything: politics, science, literature, and crucially for our story, architecture. Young British aristocrats are doing what they call the Grand Tour, where they travel to France and Italy and sketch Roman ruins and Palladian villages. They come home with classical ideas and they want England to look like Rome. This is the world that produces the Georgian Terrace. The 18th century saw some towns grow very rapidly in size, a growth based either upon manufacture, as in Birmingham, or trade, as at Bristol, or fashion, as at Bath. Georgian society was a society of appearances. Clothes, manners, furniture, everything communicated a position in the hierarchy. The household is of fundamental importance in the structure of society, since it is the unit of ranking and organization determining the social position and opportunities of its members. It was assumed by travelers that because of Europe offered an engaging display of peoples, manners, and culture that was certainly worth visiting, the experience would stimulate them to new ideas and bring them close to the sources of European culture. The Grand Tour was essential for any young gentleman of means. They would spend months or years traveling through France, Italy, and Greece, studying ruins and collecting art. They would come back to recreate what they had seen and why Georgian architecture has a classical tone. Traveling, even in the remotest ages, was reckoned so useful a custom as to be judged the only means of improving the understanding and acquiring a high degree of reputation. And there's something else driving all of this: the idea of politeness. That's a key Georgian concept. Being polite didn't just mean saying please and thank you. Even how tea was served was important. Not only was tea a luxury item, but the way of its consumption became a measure of social manners, an important component in defining politeness. Meanwhile, Britain's cities are exploding in size. London, Edinburgh, Dublin, Bristol, they all need housing, and speculative developers see an opportunity. You can build entire streets, entire quarters in the classical style, and sell them to the aspiring middle and upper classes. This is where the Georgian Terrace comes from. It's where classical ambition meets commercial reality. But there's one city where all of these forces converge in a uniquely spectacular way. Let's zoom in. Known since Roman times, the city had been famous for its hot springs. In the early 1700s, Bath becomes the ultimate social destination. The aristocracy come for the medicinal waters and they come to be seen. It is the place to be. Bath expansion began in 1725. In that year, Beau Nash, as master of ceremonies, was at the height of his influence, while the brains and capital of Ralph Allen were exploiting the capabilities of Bath stone. In that year, John Wood drew the first plans of those parts of the city with which his name will always be associated. But here's what makes Bath special for our story: the stone. Bath sits on huge deposits of oolitic limestone, Bath stone. It's warm, honey-colored, and it carves beautifully. When architects arrive with their Palladium dreams, Bath stone is the perfect medium. Two of the architects who make it happen are a father and son team who are very ambitious. Let's meet the Woods. A large part of the architectural transformation and innovation of Bath can be attributed to one family, the Woods. With the completion of Shepherd's Grosvenor Square houses about 1730, the development of urban design in London ceases, for a time, to be of much interest. The story, however, continues and reaches its climax in Bath, where street design developed in a most important way for a matter of 40 years. John Wood the Elder arrives in Bath in 1727. It was the genius of John Wood Sr. which introduced curves into a rectilinear world. He settled in Bath in 1727 at a time when the town was already well established as a fashionable resort. His grandiose schemes for an almost total rebuilding of the town were rejected by the town council. On the 3rd, he designed Queen Square and the Circus. Queen Square took 7 years to finish. The Circus was begun the year of his death in 1954, and it was completed by his son. John Wood Sr. had an almost mystical vision of classical architecture and saw the circle as a symbolic manifestation of the divine perfection. These ideas are most fully developed in King's Circus: two perfect circles, one inside the other, broken into 3 equal segments to represent the Trinity. John Wood the Younger completes King's Circus. The circus at Bath is a monumental conception, based on the Colosseum, inverted, simplified, and enormously reduced in scale, and made to be the frontispiece of 33 standard townhouses of moderate size. It has 3 superimposed orders, their entablatures richly carved, and its effect is quaintly beautiful, as if some simple-minded community had taken over an antique monument and newly adopted it as a residence. Then came a stroke of architectural genius. This architectural innovation would be copied many times over. The father made a circle. The son made a crescent. John Wood the Younger takes the curve and opens it up, facing it outwards towards the landscape. The result is the real crescent. This great semi-elliptical block, comprising of 30 houses, is of very special importance in English architecture, for it introduced a type of urban composition which was used over and over again with innumerable variations until well into the 19th century. And now we're ready to zoom into the medium scale, the architecture itself. A terrace is a row of houses that share party walls. They're physically joined, but the great idea of the Georgian Terrace is that the individual houses are designed to read as a unified composition. You walk down the street and you don't see 30 separate houses. You see what looks like a single enormous palace. The facade is continuous. The columns march in unbroken ranks. The cornice runs from one end to the other without a break. The King's Circus was a success because it treated a row of ordinary houses as a monumental unity. Builders and developers wanted to maximize profits. They had to be held in check by legally enforceable stipulations issued either by the original landlords or by the government. The most basic stipulation was the building line. That is, all houses must keep a common line at the front with their facades. Next in importance was the party wall in between the houses. This was held to belong to the original ground landlord. It had to be carefully maintained and was not allowed to be broken through. It was characteristic that builders never quite knew how to design the side of the house when it was exposed at the end of the road. In most cases, the unperforated party wall was simply left on its own, a major target of the critics of the terrace house design in the 20th century. Behind that unified front, each house can be completely different. The original builders would give buyers the specification for the facade, and then the buyers were free to design the interiors any way they liked. The Georgian Terrace was a combination of public uniformity and unity with private individuality. The key elements are bilateral symmetry, everything mirrors are on a central axis. Sash windows, those vertical sliding windows, usually 6 panes over 6, spaced with mathematical precision. And the classical orders, columns, capitals, cornices, all drawn from the ancient world. The effect is deliberate. These aren't just houses, they're stages for the Georgian performance of civilized life. And the greatest stage of all is in Bath. There was an interesting, or perhaps whimsical, consequence of the way Georgian terraces were built. There was a big difference between the very uniform front facade that all the units share and the back part of the Georgian terrace, which could be as different from unit to unit as one could imagine. Many refer to Georgian terraces as having Queen Anne fronts and Mary Anne backs. The Royal Crescent. If you stand on the lawn below and look up, you see 500 feet of unbroken Bath stone curving across the hillside. A total of 30 houses. 114 Ionic columns rising over a rustic ground floor. A continuous cornice and parapet running from end to end. It was the first crescent of terraced houses ever built. John Wood the Younger created this architectural form. The proportions are incredible. The crescent is half an ellipse, not a true semicircle, but a slightly flattened curve. It's oriented to face south, looking out over what's now Royal Victoria Park. There's a hidden ditch at the edge of the lawn, originally designed to keep grazing animals away without breaking the view. The residents can look out from their drawing rooms and see rolling green parkland as if they were in the countryside. It's a concept the Roman called Rus in urbe, or the country in the city. This great semi-elliptical block comprising 30 houses is of the very special importance in English architecture, for it introduced a type of urban composition which was used over and over again with innumerable variations until well into the 19th century. The crescent was built between 1767 and 1774. The land was bought from the Garrard family, and the houses were sold to wealthy buyers who got the facade as designed but could do whatever they liked with the interior. Behind that perfect front, the houses vary. They have different floor plans, different staircase, different levels of grandeur. It's part of Bath's UNESCO World Heritage Site. After more than 250 years, one of the most photographed and admired buildings in Britain. But let's go closer still. Let's step inside. Here is another contradiction at the heart of the Georgian Terrace. On the outside, everything is controlled and uniform. Look at the facade on top. Everything is perfectly spaced. The cornice runs in an unbroken line. Every window is exactly the same size at the same height. It's architectural discipline at its finest. The individual disappears into the whole. From the street, you cannot tell when one house ends and another begins. Once you step through the front door, everything changes. The interior belongs entirely to each owner. Tall sash windows flooding the rooms with light, marble fireplaces as the focal point of each room, paneled walls, fine furniture, classical molding. Each house is a private world of taste and wealth. At number 1 Royal Crescent, now a museum, you can see a Georgian interior restored to its original condition. The drawing room, the dining room, the gentleman's retreat, and in each room you'll find the same principles that govern the exterior: proportion, symmetry, restraint, but expressed with warmth, with the comfort of daily life. We come to our final zoom, because in those drawing rooms, on those polished tables, beside those marble fireplaces, sits an object that connects what we have talked about. An object that links empire to etiquette, trade routes to social rituals, craftsmanship to class. The silver tea kettle. And here we finally arrive at the smallest scale, a silver tea kettle, sitting on its spirit burner stand, maybe a foot tall with a wooden handle to protect your fingers from the heat. This is not just a functional object. This is a Georgian story compressed into silver. The tea comes from China, probably shipped around the world by the East India Company. In the early 1700s, a pound of tea cost more than a skilled craftsman earns in a week. To prevent servants from stealing it, tea was generally kept in a locked tea caddy in the private closet of the mistress of the house. Drinking tea is not for everyone. It's for the wealthy. The usefulness of tea as a signifier of elite culture was not, in practice, affected when consumption was no longer limited to the privileged. It still costs a fortune to enjoy high-quality tea with the proper equipage, and more importantly, tea drinking continued to fit perfectly into social ideals of politeness. Now look at the silver. Much of the silver comes from Spanish colonial mines in America. It's work by master silversmith in London workshop. These craftsmen apply the same classical craftsmanship to a tea kettle that the Woods applied to the Royal Crescent. The restrained classical ornament, the harmony between form and function. And then there's the actual ritual. By the mid-18th century, tea is being served in the drawing rooms of every Georgian household that can afford it. The mistress of the house presides. She unlocks the tea caddy, measures the leaves, oversees the pouring. There's a whole set of artifacts: the kettle on its stand, the teapot, the cream jug, the sugar bowl, the spoon tray, the cups and saucers, each piece crafted, displays, and used in a social performance. In the pump room in Bath, you can still have tea today. Listen to the pump room trio, a tradition that stretches back to 1709. The ritual endures. So let's zoom back out for a moment and see what we found. At every scale, we've encountered the same principle: proportion, symmetry, classical order, and the performance of civilized life. Georgian England created a culture that valued reason and appearance in equal measure. Bath became the city where that culture found its purest architectural expression. The Royal Crescent gave it monumental form, 30 houses acting as one, a facade of perfect classical discipline, and the silver tea kettle sitting in the drawing room behind that facade carries all the same values in miniature: balanced proportion, classical ornament, the ritual performance of status. It's the same DNA at every level, the curve of the crescent copied in the curve of the kettle's body. That's what makes Georgian period so wonderful. It wasn't just an architectural style, it was a complete worldview expressed at every scale, from the city plan down to the kettle. And that brings us full crescent. We start with a nation, England in the Georgian period, making itself in the image of ancient Rome. We zoom into Bath, the city where that ambition found its perfect medium in honey-colored Bath stone. We stood before the Royal Crescent and saw how 30 individual houses could become one unified statement of classical perfection. Georgian Terraces support Aristotle's claim that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We ended the tour holding a silver tea kettle, an object that carries the whole story in its curve, its craftsmanship, and the social ritual it took part in. Nicholas Pevsner, the great architectural writer, said, "Nature is no longer the servant of architecture. The two are equals." Georgian architecture, it seems, wasn't about dominating the landscape. It was about creating harmony and uniformity between the building and the setting, between the public and the private, between the grand and the intimate. The Royal Crescent still stands, much as it looked in 1774. The tea kettles still gleam in museum cases. Thanks for listening. Next time you pour a cup of tea, look at the kettle. There might be more history in it than you think.